The World Championship just happened this weekend, and there was crazy drama, including a world champion getting last place due to a stupid rule, a single line causing an Asian record holder to DNF, and a crazy ending in the 3x3 finals. But let's start by diving into day 1 of the competition, when immediately there was controversy about the cutoff for multi-blind. Usually, competitions have a cutoff, where if you miss it, you will not be allowed to continue. This allows competitions to get rid of inexperienced competitors early. But the exact opposite happened in this competition, where there was a cutoff of above 14 points. Graham Siggins is the best multi-blind solver in the world, being the reigning world champion and the world record holder. However, he was not able to perform well, possibly due to the room not being very quiet. And he got a DNF. Because he didn't reach 14 points, he has no more chances to defend his world's title. Furthermore, here is Yu Chang Chen, the second best multi-blind solver in the world. In his first attempt, he tried to solve 54 cubes blindfolded. Unfortunately, he ran out of time. When he lifted his blindfold, only 34 of the cubes were solved. 34 solved cubes minus the 20 unsolved cubes gave a score of 14. So he also doesn't make the cutoff. With the 2 top multi-blind solvers in the world missing the cutoff, there was an unexpected podium that no one would have guessed. But next was the 4x4 blindfolded round. Coming into the competition, Stanley Chappell was clearly the favorite, and he definitely showed that with his 116 on his first solve. In his second solve, he improves that further to a 111. There's some nice solves from Tommy Cherry and Daniel Wallen, but Ho Peng Yong Fang is still not in the podium. The last solve doesn't really help many people, so this was the final podium of the competition. But on the next day was 5x5 blindfolded. Here was the time for Ho Peng Yong Fang to redeem himself after not podiuming in 4 blind. The first solve is pretty slow for everyone, with most people DNFing. But in the second solve, a huge surprise came when Ho Peng Yong Fang got the world record with a 218.78, beating his own previous record by just a tiny bit. Meanwhile, Stanley has a 319, but that's over a minute slower. With the last solve, Ho Peng Yong Fang and Stanley cannot improve their times. But Adrian Debsky does and sneaks into second. But later that day were the first finals on the main stage, starting with 6x6. And this might be the craziest round in the whole competition. In the first round, Max Park destroyed the world record average with a mean of 107.11. However, Timon Kolczynski almost got last place in the seeding for this final. Max Park is solving first.
Max Park not done yet at 110. Oh wow.
In a crazy turn of events, Max Park is getting a 126. Definitely not good enough to win. Meanwhile, everyone's getting pretty good times, including a 113 by Timon. In this next solve, Max Park has to bring it back.
Still got some edges left at high 50s. He's still got more edges to solve. Definitely feeling the nerves. You can see him peeking at the timer. He's very stressed out over this.
But he gets a 131. With those 2 solves, he's almost guaranteed out of the podium. Meanwhile, Timon has a 116. He's on pace to win this championship. Max needs a huge solve at the end for even a chance of the podium. He gets a 114, which isn't bad, but that's not good enough for podium. With his last clutch solve, Timon gets a 116 and wins the championship. Even though he's disappointed, Kieran did enough to get second, and Nam did just enough to get third. But now it's time for the clock final. Zaid Chowdhury is the first seed, and the world record holder Tommy Cherry is in second. But with all the talent, this podium is wide open. With a 528 for his first solve, Zaid is almost out of it already. Meanwhile, Tommy Cherry starts with a bang.
A 297. Checking it solved. It is solved.
With a DNF for his second solve, Zaid is pretty much out of the podium with a counting 5. Meanwhile, there are pretty good showings from other people like Luke Garrett. They might have a chance at the podium. Tommy Cherry is staying consistent though. He finished up strong with a 3.75 average, almost beating second and third place by a full second. Then there's Megaminx. Leandro Martin Lopez got first place in the first round, and Nicholas Nang got second, so most people are watching them. Leandro starts with a 34, definitely not ideal when you're trying to get a sub 30 average. Nicholas starts with a 33, so it's not going very well for the top competitors. Leandro gets a 25 plus 2. The time is pretty good, but you don't want that plus 2 to affect your average. Nicholas then gets a 30 and a 27, while Leandro gets a 28. It seems like the podium is still wide open. Leandro then gets a 29, and Nicholas gets a 27. Tristan Chuo Young is also on a good pace, and so is Alexander Vucic. This last solve will say a lot for each of these cubers. Leandro gets a counting 31, which is not ideal. So does Nicholas Nang. However, Alexander gets a 28. This gives him a PR average and a really good shot for podium. But with a final solve of 30, Tristan Chuo Young wins the competition. And Nicholas Nang, who got second in the last round, doesn't even podium. But now it's the 7x7 final. Can Max Park redeem the fact that he missed the podium in 6x6? Immediately, there's a really nice reaction from Max Park with his first solve, 145, which should be pretty good. And it seems like everyone wants an extra now because his reaction was pretty loud. But Timon is still doing very well, a 152 for his first solve. Max then gets a 153. Not his best solve, but those two solves should be enough to lock the first place spot. Meanwhile, Timon gets a 2-minute solve. To clutch up, Timon finishes with a 154. That mean is 155, which is good enough for second place. But on the next day, it was the final attempt for FMC. So far, Jaden McNeil is in the lead, and a few others are doing pretty well. But this last solve is crucial. Jaden McNeil gets only a 22, leaving the door slightly open. Several cubers doing better, finding 21s, 20s, and even 19s. All eyes are on Chong Wen Wong, who had a good start and seems to have found a 20-move solution. But looking at his paper, there is clearly an issue. He wrote a solution and crossed it out for a new solution. But the problem was he didn't cross out the last letter from the solution. This added move ruined the solution, making it a DNF, and now he has no chance of winning or podiuming. In fact, there were several cubers with good results, but DNF'd out of the podium. But here's the final podium with Jaden McNeil winning. Later that day was the Nations Cup, where countries battled it out in a 3-cube relay. There were some fast highlights, but for the most part, all matchups went as expected. However, there was a pretty big upset in the third round with Poland versus Canada. By starting the timer early, Timon broke the regulations of the event, making them DNF and lose even though they had the faster time. Also in round 3 was United States 3 versus the defending champions Germany 1.
Oh my goodness, this is massive. Philip versus Max. World champion.
He's done it.
And surprisingly, the United States' weakest team just beat the champions from 2019. The quarterfinals goes as expected as well. United States 1 beats China 2. Philippines 1 beats Canada 1.
It's not going to be enough for Canada.
China 1 beats China 3.
China 1 takes it.
And United States 2 beats United States 3.
United States 2 takes it.
Now for the semifinals, United States 1 faces Philippines 1.
Okay, so Sean Patrick Villanueva versus Max. It's Ru versus CFOP. Ru takes it. This is close. Philippines are up by about half a second.
Philippines are getting further ahead.
Leo, oh my gosh, Maddie's given up. It's going to be Philippines in the final.
Philippines
USA's
takes
out.
it.
And with that crucial mistake, the Philippines moves to the finals. Next, there's China 1 versus the United States 2.
Oh, this is fast. He's on PLL now. China 1. They'll have the lead by about a second and a half.
The venue has not been this quiet all day, even during blind.
It's a +2 from Dylan. I think that spells doom for them. Yeah, he's not going to mess this up.
Even with the United States' best effort, China is too quick for them. Now for the bronze medal match, it's between United States 1 and United States 2.
Max with the ZB, but it's still really close, both low 5s.
And yet again, the United States' best team makes a mistake, and United States 2 gets third place, which leads up to the finals, with the Philippines versus China.
On stage right now. Very fast TPS from both of them, but it's China leading by a second, and Yizheng's not letting up. It's still down to Yiheng versus...
And China shows that they're too much for the Philippines, and wins with a comfortable margin. But now we're on to the final day of the competition, with the main finals starting with square 1. The top 4 seeds for this competition are all Americans, and they seem to be the favorites for the podium. The first solve isn't ideal for most of the solvers, but Samir starts with a 5.28, a really good start for this average. In the second solve, they seem to do a bit better. Max with a 6.1, Hassan with a 6.12, and Daniel with a 5.58. Samir gets a 5.6, so he's starting with a counting 5, which is excellent. This third scramble also seems to be pretty easy. Max with a 5.6, Hassan with a 4, and Daniel with a 5.5. With a 5.3, Samir is looking really good. 2 counting 5s, and everyone else is not doing that great. But with Samir's 5-second solve, he guarantees a sub-6 average and a win. But now onto Scube. The favorites have to be Kart Kukala and Zain Kanani, both from the US and both former record holders in this event. Carter's first solve is not amazing, but low 2 is probably good enough for podium in this event. Zain then gets a 1.89 with a +2. Definitely not the most ideal start. Carter's solves are going alright, but just not the greatest times. It looks like he might have secured podium though. Meanwhile, Zain is popping off. Off stream, we know Stanley Chapel is doing pretty well, with around a 2.3 average. which means Zayn just needs a solid solve here to win the World Championship.
Clutch moment. No!
And that lockup cost him the World Championship. With his best time, US National Champion Simon Kellum can clutch the win.
Simon getting ready. He's gone.
Oh,
He hasn't started the timer.
Unfortunately, he doesn't even start the timer, giving him a DNF. And surprisingly, that puts Stanley Chapel at first place, and Zayn at third place in this podium. But now we have Pyraminx. Michael Nielsen is the US National Champion, and is also the first seed for this event. Sebastian is the highest seed in the psych sheet, so he's also a favorite. They both get pretty solid starts, 209 for Michael, and 1.86 for Sebastian. Their next few solves are also pretty solid. Michael gets a 1.7, and another 1.7. Sebastian gets a 207, and then a 1.79. There are rumors about this fourth scramble being pretty easy. Sebastian solves pretty well in it, getting a 1.65. But now it's up to Michael Nielsen. With a good solve here, he'll secure the World Championship.
Comes down to the last few solves. Getting results coming in left, right, and center. A +2 for Michael Nielsen.
And that +2 in the back cost him World Champion. Meanwhile, there are some pretty impressive showings from other Chinese cubers, including Li Ke. Sebastian's final solve doesn't go as planned, but he still locked a sub-2 average. And it seems like the time to beat is China's Huining Huang with a 1.88 average. Michael Nielsen needs a pretty good solve here to secure the World Champion.
Michael Nielsen.
And with yet another back +2, Michael Nielsen not only misses the championship, but also the podium, with amazing showings by these two Chinese cubers. But now, there's 5x5. Timon won the last round with a European average. Max Park already lost 6x6 to Timon, and he does not want this to happen again in 5x5. His start is not the greatest though. A 45 single is not even enough for podium. Timon, however, gets a 42. On the side, Sunghyuk Nam is doing pretty well with a 41. Sunghyuk Nam gets another 41, and so does Timon. But Max Park gets a high 42. The solve is now counting, and it seems like he's almost out of contention for World Champion. On the third solve, he picks it up with a 42nd single. But meanwhile, Timon gets a 39. This is not looking very good for Max. With a couple of 43s, Sunghyuk Nam is probably out of contention for champion, but probably secured third place. Timon then gets a 40, which is okay, but it leaves the door open for Max Park. Max gets a 36, an incredible solve, but is it too late? Timon finishes strong with a 37.63. Now it's on Max to get a really good solve in order to win World Champion.
At home solve. But can he
I
deliver
don't know.
at
His
this
hands are
point?
starting. Oh my god. Oh!
And with a clutch 37.3, Max Park wins World Champion, beating Timon by just 0.2. But now it's time for one-handed. In the last round, Patrick Ponce almost got the world record, and Max Park got second. Those are probably the top two to look out for. Patrick first starts with a 10.07, which is good, but you probably need sub 10 to make the podium. Max Park starts with a 9.19, which is much better. Meanwhile, some other cubers are doing pretty well. Juliet has a sub 10, and Sean Patrick Villanueva, who uses Rue, has a 9.2. Patrick then gets a 13. Now his 10-second solve is counting. Max Park gets a 10.27, which again is not the best. However, Juliet Sebastian is getting consistent sub 10s, and Sean even has a sub 9. Patrick then gets a 9.79. He needs 2 more really good solves to even have a chance of podiuming. Max Park gets a 10.7, so the same thing can be said about him. Juliet is staying clean with sub 10s, and so is Sean. With decent solves from Patrick Ponce and Max Park, it just isn't enough with them not getting sub 10 averages. So now the question is, who can? With an 8-second solve, Luke Garrett has gotten pretty close with a 10 flat average. Juliet had one bad solve, but she did lock in sub 10. With a 9.5, Sean locked in a sub 10 average, and looking pretty good. With a +2 on his last solve, Luke Garrett keeps his 10 flat average. Sean's last solve is not very good, but he still locked a pretty good average. And with one really good solve from Juliet, she locked second place. With that, Sean Patrick Villanueva is the new world champion for one-handed, being the first Rue user to accomplish this feat. But now it's 4x4 time. The favorites have to be Max Park, Timon Kolczynski, and Sebastian Weyer. Timon first starts with a 19-second solve, an amazing start for this average. Meanwhile, Max Park starts with a 25. In his next solve, Timon gets a 25, and then Max Park gets a 21. This is still a relatively even match. But with Max Park's counting 24, this is not going very good. And once he gets another counting 24, it's looking pretty grim for him, even for the podium. Meanwhile, Timon has a 20 and another 20. He's in a very solid spot and can potentially win this championship. Meanwhile, Do Quang Hong from Vietnam is doing very well, locking in a record average of 22. Max Park needs a really good solve here to lock the podium. While he didn't win, this is good enough for podium and he seems pretty happy about that. But Timon needs a good solve here for the win.
24.9, he's still pretty content with that. It is counting.
24.93 is not the best solve, but it does improve his average. Out of nowhere, Matty has gotten several 21-second solves. If this solve is good, he could be world champion.
Third place at the moment. But Matty needs 22.5 to win. Oh, it's a 29.
But with a counting 29, he's not even in the podium. So that gives Timon the win for 4x4 world champion. But now we have the 2x2 finals. Zain Kanani won the last round, so he's definitely the favorite. But there's plenty of great 2x2 solvers right behind him, including many other Chinese cubers, like Yiheng Wang. Yiheng starts with a solid 1.3, while Zain Kanani gets a mid 1, which is not the greatest start. Yiheng then gets a 1.2 for the second solve, and Zain follows up with 1.1. Then Yiheng gets a 0.87. That's a very impressive time for the finals, and it looks like he's in the lead. Zain, however, gets a 1.6 on this scramble. Now his 1.5 is counting, which is not good. Meanwhile, there are some cubers that are doing really well from China. Li Ke Li, who got third in Pyraminx, has some pretty solid mid 1 solves. And Ziyu Ye is doing even better than Yiheng. With his mid 1, he pretty much locked podium, with a 1.34 PR average. Meanwhile, Yiheng Wang gets a 1.6. Not quite good enough for the win. Zain gets a 1.1, which puts him back in it. Here's Yiheng Wang's final solve.
1.28 for
Oh,
Michael
Yiheng's messed
Nielsen.
up.
That lockup cost him the world champion. Now he has a 1.39 average, and it'll be pretty close to see if he podiums. Zain finishes with a 1.37. That gives him a 1.36 average for second place so far. There are a few cubers that still have a chance. Kyungmin Choi does, but this last solve removes him from the podium. Here's Anthony Paterakis.
And that is a 1.46.
He's very happy about this solve, but quickly he realizes that this is not even enough for podium. He gets 5th place. So here's the podium, with Chinese cubers getting 1st and 3rd, and Zain getting 2nd. And averages that are so close to each other. But now onto 2x3 blindfolded, where the top seed is Tommy Cherry, and 2nd is Elliot Koblensky. Both are current or former world records in this event. Elliot starts with a DNF, which is not very good. However, Tommy gets a 14. This is a very solid solve, and that first solve might have already locked him champion. Meanwhile, Stanley has a 15.72, but on the side, Philip Maxwell gets the Asian record with a 14.93. That's good enough for 2nd so far. In the second solve, Charlie Eggins gets a 15.24. Not too bad, but that's barely 3rd place right now. Meanwhile, Tommy wants to improve his single.
Not even close.
And with a 13.98, he pretty much locked world champion. With one more solve to go for Tommy, and with world champion pretty much locked, he's going to safety his solve.
Fast. Yes, world record.
With a 14.39, he gets a 14.15 mean, which is a new world record. It was also surprised that Liam Chen got his PR to get 3rd place, just barely beating Charlie Eggins. But finally, we have the 2x3 final. To even make this final, you need to get a 6.56 average. That's pretty crazy. The first 2 cubers out were Dwayne Ramos and Sunghae Nam. They both start pretty strong, but the rest of their solves aren't the greatest, so they're expected to get last at this final. Next, we have Americans Luke Garrett and Asher Kimajeric. With Asher's start, it seems like he's out of contention for podium already. But for Luke, it's the opposite.
And that's a 5.32. Moving very quickly. Oh, wow.
Starting with 2 low 5s, he's definitely in contention for podium and even the win. His next 2 solves are okay, but not the greatest. With a last solve of 6.17, he gets his worst possible average of 5.82. But we'll see if that's enough for podium. Next, we have Philip Weyer, the defending champion, and Bofan Zhang, who's a rising talent from China. Philip has some solid solves, but doesn't get any 5s, which is not good enough to defend his title. Bofan Zhang does start pretty well, with his second solve being a 4.5. Following up though, he only gets one other 5-second solve. That gives him a 6.06 PR average, but that's unlikely to podium. Next, we have Kyle Santucci and Alexei Svetkov. Alexei is the only other user in his finals, but that doesn't seem to be an advantage. His first 2 solves were already pretty bad, taking him out of contention quickly. Meanwhile, Kyle is performing pretty well. But unlike nationals, a 6 average in this competition is not good enough for podium. Next, we have Yufang Du and Brennan Lin. Brennan Lin's start wasn't the greatest, with a 7.44, but those digits gets reversed in the second solve. His 4.47 breaks the record for the fastest time in a championship final for 2x3. However, the rest of his solves don't go to plan. Meanwhile, Yufang Du is doing pretty well, with 2 low 5-second solves. Unfortunately, he gets this counting 6.41, but he does finish with a 5.85. That's good enough for sub 6, but not quite good enough for podium probably. Next was Yuze Wang and Max Park. Yuze Wang solves pretty solid in the beginning with a counting 5.2. Unfortunately, the last two solves aren't exactly what he wants. Although he locked in a sub 6 average, that's again likely not enough for podium. But all eyes are on Max Park and how he does.
Very quick turning. Quite pauseless. OLL done before 4.
His first solve is a 504, which is the best solve on his scramble so far. His next solve being a 5.42 is also very good. Then he gets yet another 5. 5.69 is not enough for the win, but it's not a bad time to count in your average. This fourth solve though is very important.
Somewhere. Max Fluid. This looks good, ZBLL.
With a 4-second solve, he locks first place so far. But for this last solve, he wants to make his average even better, to make it as hard as possible for everyone after him to beat him. With a 5.48, he improves his average slightly to a 5.31, which is not too bad considering nerves, so we'll see if it makes the podium or wins. And next we have Timon Kolczynski and Maddie Hirota Inaba. Maddie starts with 2 6s, which almost immediately takes him out of contention for the podium. Even though he ends with a 4-second solve and a 5.9 average, that's unfortunately not good enough. Timon also starts with a 6, being pretty nervous, but this next solve is pretty key to bring him back.
Oh, this is
A 4.76 is very good. Timon wants to keep this momentum.
chooses yellow.
And he gets a 5 flat that's counting, putting him in a very good position to challenge Max Park. This fourth scramble seems to be pretty easy, and he proves that with a 4.54 single. Now he's accounting 4.7 and accounting 5 flat. This average even has the potential to be sub 5, so there's a lot of nerves on this last solve.
A little bit.
Not the best solve, but he's okay with it, as it improves his average just a bit. It's unfortunate though, that it was not enough to beat Max Park. Finally, we have Rui Hong Shu and Yiheng Wang. Rui Hong starts pretty solid.
We know the TPS is incredible.
However, Yiheng Wang is a bit nervous. In the second solve though, he catches up. This third solve will tell a lot about what averages both of these competitors would get. This solve makes Rui Hong's 5.7 counting, which is not ideal. On the other hand, this solve makes Yiheng's 4.7 counting, which puts him in a solid spot for contending for the title. In the next solve, Rui Hong comes back.
Ruhang on his 4th.
This 4.7 keeps him in contention. If this is counting, he could do pretty well. Then there's Yiheng Wang.
Goes.
Another really good solve. The 5.15 is counting, and he has potential for a sub 5 average, putting him in a similar position as Timon. But Rui Hong is going to go first.
Roy Hang can still take it away from Max, but
Oh,
with
there's
that
a
pause, it's going
pause.
to be difficult.
Double.
With a 5.82 single, that gives Rui Hong a 5.59 average, which is pretty good, but locks him out of podium. But this last solve by Yiheng Wang will determine if he's the champion or not. If he gets his worst solve, he will lose to Max Park by 0.01. But any other solve below 6.04, and he's the new world champion.
Average will still get him at least
off.
second.
Maybe a small look up. Oh, E-perm.
And with a Locky R-perm to end it off, Yiheng gets his worst possible average, meaning he lost the world championship to Max Park by 0.01. What a crazy finish. With that, Max Park is your new 2x3 world champion. I really thought Yiheng would clutch up and get a sub 5 average, but nerves definitely got the best of him. Hope you guys enjoyed this recap and let me know your thoughts in the comments below.